The day my grandfather passed away, I thought I had lost my only anchor. But then at the reading of his will, the lawyer called my name, August, as the heir to the most valuable building in the heart of the city. My parents were stunned, and my younger brother Jackson screamed for his share. They came at me threatening, even bringing in brokers to pressure me into selling. Little did they know, a secret deal had already been sealed, and the person waiting in that building that day was someone my entire family would never have expected. That mysterious buyer left Jackson's face pale as a ghost the moment he saw them. My name is August Harlan, and if you ask me about my childhood, I won't regale you with cheerful tales of family picnics or surprise birthday gifts. No, my childhood was like a relentless drizzle in Charleston, not torrential, but enough to soak you to the bone, leaving you cold and wondering why the sun couldn't break through just a little. At 28, I live in a quaint little apartment on the South Carolina coast, where the salty Atlantic breeze carries the scent of salt and freedom. I'm a fitness trainer, the kind of guy you'd see at the gym at 6 a.m., wiping sweat and smiling when my clients lift weights for the first time without trembling. My career is steady, enough to afford soft cotton t-shirts and an old, reliable pickup truck, but I'm not the flashy type. I love morning runs along the beach, barefoot on wet sand, listening to the waves crash like whispers from my grandfather, the only person who ever truly saw me. I'm not rich in the sense of an overflowing bank account, but I'm wealthy in another way. The peace that comes from my own decisions. Every morning I brew a cup of black coffee and sit by the window, looking out at ancient oak trees draping their shadows over cobblestone streets. Charleston is where I've chosen to anchor myself, not just because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it gives me space to breathe, to forget the scars of my past. That past, if you dig deep, leads to a small wooden house in the suburbs, where my brother's laughter rang like church bells while my whispers were like leaves rustling underfoot. My family, or what I called a family, was always a lopsided painting where light shone on one corner, leaving the other steeped in shadow. Let me start from the beginning, because that's where it all stems from, back when I was a scrawny kid with deep brown eyes, always trying to prove I existed. My parents, the Harlans, were ordinary folks in a small town near Charleston. Dad worked at a shipyard, his hands calloused from bolts and anti-rust paint. Mom was an elementary school teacher with a warm smile for her students, but an exhausted one at home. They loved us in their way, but their love was warped by something called favoritism. Not the blatant, malicious kind, but the quiet, creeping kind, like a habit they didn't notice. And at the center of it all was Jackson, my younger brother, born 6 years after me, like an unexpected gift they couldn't stop indulging. Jackson was a talkative kid with golden hair and a grin that could melt ice. From a young age, he knew how to tell stories, make people laugh, and turn small mistakes into humorous adventures. "My Jackson, you're such a storyteller," I remember Mom saying, her eyes sparkling as he described a school soccer game with exaggerated gestures. And me? I was August, the quiet older brother who liked sitting in a corner reading history books or drawing imaginary maps of grand explorations. I wasn't good at talking or being the center of attention. I was good at listening, and maybe that's why they thought I didn't need much. "You're the big brother, August," Dad would say, his voice low like the hum of shipyard machinery. "You've got to let your brother have his turn." That's what family's about. My childhood memories are filled with moments like that. Small cracks in the family wall, painless at first, but over time they carved a deep wound. On my 10th birthday, I longed for a bike. Not a fancy one, just something to ride around the neighborhood, feeling the wind whip my face like I was flying. But when the day came, my gift was an old sports book. Something Dad said was fitting for a big boy. Meanwhile, Jackson, just 4, got a lavish party at the park. Balloons, a towering chocolate cake, and a buzzing electric toy car that sounded like the real thing. "We knew you'd love this, sweetie," Mom said, ruffling Jackson's hair while I sat in a corner pretending to be engrossed in my book. Then there was the academic award. In 5th grade, I spent the semester memorizing math formulas, staying up late under a dim yellow lamp. My teacher called my name in front of the class, handing me a certificate with a shiny gold badge. I ran home, heart pounding, imagining my parents hugging me like in the movies. But when I held up the certificate, Mom barely glanced at it. "Oh, nice job, August." "Now help me set the table. Jackson's about to get home." Jackson, then in kindergarten, was praised for a scribbled family drawing, and so the family threw a little celebration. Delivered pizza, fizzy soda, and Dad bragging about Jackson's artistic talent to relatives over the phone. Me? I folded my certificate, tucked it into a drawer, and kept studying because at least my grades were something no one could take away. Those examples piled up like winter snow, each layer a little heavier. Jackson got a new MacBook for his middle school graduation. "For coding, a bright future," Dad explained, while I, at 16, used the school's flickering, half-broken computer. A summer abroad? Jackson jetted off to Europe on an exchange program, his social media flooded with grinning photos by the Eiffel Tower. Meanwhile, I asked for $200 to join a climbing club, something that made me feel strong and free among the cliffs, and was shot down instantly. "Money's tight, son," Mom sighed. "Jackson needs new books for class. You're the big brother. You understand." I understood in the most painful way. In this house, what's good is for Jackson. But amidst that darkness, there was a torch. Henry, my grandfather. He was a tall man with a snow-white beard and razor-sharp blue eyes, a former Navy officer from the Vietnam War. He lived in a small wooden house by the Cooper River, where he'd sit on the porch in the afternoons, smoking a pipe and telling stories of sea voyages and storms he'd weathered with sheer will. He didn't talk much about love, but he saw me, truly saw me, as if I were a hidden treasure. "August," he'd call me to the backyard where ripe oranges hung heavy on the trees. "You're not like anyone else in this family. You've got a straight back, not a silver tongue." Grandpa was the only one who saw my true worth. When I told him about the forgotten certificate, he didn't offer empty comfort. He took me to the garage and handed me a refurbished bike gleaming like new. "Here, son. Ride it and remember. Success isn't about who claps for you. It's about knowing you gave it your all." He taught me to fish by the river, not to show off, but to listen to the water and learn patience. On those afternoons when my parents were busy with Jackson, Grandpa became my real father. Strict, disciplined, but full of faith in me. He saw my hard work in school, my honesty when I admitted small mistakes, and my resilience when life knocked me down. One summer evening when I was 12, Grandpa sat by a campfire in his backyard, the smoke curling upward with the scent of burning pine. Jackson was at home with our parents, probably entertaining the neighbors with his jokes. I sat beside Grandpa, watching the fire's embers flicker like falling stars. "August," he said, his voice warm and steady like the tide, "you don't need a slick tongue to win at life. People like Jackson, they use words to cover things up, but when the wind blows, it all scatters. You need a straight back, to stand tall through storms. Working hands, to build something lasting, and a mind that keeps its word, because that's the greatest asset a man can have. Don't let anyone tell you you're not worthy, son. I believe in you." Those words carved themselves into my heart like an etching on oak. They didn't erase the injustices, but they gave me a small flame to warm the coldest nights. Grandpa didn't promise grand things, no wealth, no public praise, but he gave me the belief that I was enough, that my silence wasn't weakness but strength waiting to erupt. And in the years that followed, as life tested me with mounting unfairness, I clung to those words like a lifeboat in a stormy sea. From ages 18 to 22, I learned how to stand tall, even when the world seemed determined to bend me. When I started college, I had nothing but a partial scholarship and a suitcase full of old clothes. Meanwhile, Jackson, only 12 but already given a personal bank account by our parents to learn money management, had everything handed to him. My parents never said it outright, but their eyes when I asked about tuition spoke volumes. August, you can manage, right? Jackson's younger. He needs us more. I nodded, swallowing the familiar ache, and began my journey of independence, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. I chose to study sports and health at the College of Charleston, not just out of passion, but because I knew I could excel in it. I loved the feeling of sweat dripping down my forehead, the ragged breaths as I pushed heavier weights each week, and especially the moment when my body screamed, "Give up," but I kept going. That's where I found the strength my family never gave me. But college wasn't just about training. It was about long nights working to pay tuition, rent, and meager meals of peanut butter sandwiches. I juggled 3 jobs. By day, I waited tables at a small diner near campus where the smell of frying oil and the clatter of dishes became my rhythm. I smiled at customers, took orders, and occasionally pocketed a few bucks in tips from kind strangers. At night, I cleaned a gym in the suburbs, wiping down steamy mirrors and racking weights. On weekends, I tutored high school kids in math, sitting under the library's fluorescent lights, explaining equations I'd memorized years ago. Every dollar was meticulously budgeted: $50 for electricity, $30 for groceries, $100 saved for next semester's tuition. I lived with discipline, not to boast, but because I knew if I slipped, no one would catch me. Meanwhile, Jackson lived a different life. Our parents fully funded his high school years, giving him an old car to get around, a wardrobe full of designer clothes, and expensive summer camps. I remember visiting home once when Jackson showed off a new pair of basketball sneakers, probably worth my month's rent. "Dad says he wants me to be a basketball star." Jackson grinned, tossing a ball in the driveway. My parents never asked how I was doing at school, if I could afford books, or if I ever skipped dinner to save money. "August can handle himself," Mom once told a neighbor, her voice brimming with pride, as if my self-reliance was a badge of honor. But I didn't want a badge. The gym became my forge. I didn't just train to get strong, I trained to forget the heartache. I started helping others at the gym, newcomers, people trembling as they lifted weights for the first time. I taught them how to keep their backs straight, breathe properly, and believe in themselves. Slowly, I realized I wasn't just good at training. I was good at inspiring. The seeds of a fitness coach were planted, though I didn't yet dare dream of making it a career. After college, I decided to stay in Charleston. Not because I couldn't leave, but because this city had become home. A place where I could hear the waves crash each morning and feel close to my grandfather, who still lived a few miles away. I started as a personal trainer, initially with just a handful of clients at the old gym. I poured my heart into each one, a single mom wanting to reclaim her strength, a skinny kid hoping to stand up to bullies. I didn't just teach them to lift weights, I taught them to lift themselves up after falling. My reputation grew quietly but steadily. Clients referred me to friends, and soon I had a solid roster. I saved every penny, rented a small apartment by the beach, and for the first time I felt I truly owned something. Not material wealth, but independence. Jackson, on the other hand, drifted through his world. Our parents paid for his college, but he kept switching majors. Business to design to communications, as if he didn't know what he wanted. Every time I visited home, I heard about Jackson's latest ventures. A failed coffee shop, a startup app no one downloaded. "Jackson's just finding his path," Dad said, his voice full of leniency, while Mom added, "August is fine. Jackson needs time." I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I stayed close with my grandfather, the only one who never compared me to Jackson. He'd visit the gym sitting on an old wooden bench, watching me coach clients with pride in his gleaming eyes. "You're building something stronger than money, August," he'd say, his voice deep like the Cooper River's tides. "Honor and trust, that's what people remember you for." Those words warmed me through lonely days, when I'd lie in my small apartment, listening to rain tap the windows and wondering if my family would ever acknowledge me. But life, as my grandfather once said, always brings storms. And my biggest storm hit at 25, when he, the man who gave me the faith to stand tall, passed away forever. That's when everything changed, when I realized that injustice wasn't just childhood memories but a real battle, where I had to defend not only myself but also my grandfather's legacy. That autumn, Charleston was awash in the golden red hues of oak trees, but for me the world was painted in shades of gray. My grandfather Henry passed away in his sleep at 82, in the small wooden house by the Cooper River where he used to sit, puffing on his pipe and telling me stories of storms at sea. I got the news from Mom in a brief phone call, her voice trembling but maintaining the calm of someone used to organizing everything. "He's gone, August. Come home now." No words of comfort, no questions about how I was doing. Just an order, as if I were a soldier in her army. I drove my old pickup truck back home, the familiar road stretching endlessly before me. Every curve conjured images of Grandpa, standing by the river teaching me to fish, fixing an old bike in the garage, watching me lift weights at the gym with his subtle smile. He was the torch that lit my way through the years I felt invisible. Losing him wasn't just losing a loved one. It was like losing a part of myself, the part that believed I was worthy, that I was enough. I pulled over a few miles from the house to wipe away silent tears. I didn't want to walk into that house with red eyes, didn't want my parents or Jackson to see me vulnerable. I'd learned long ago to keep my pain locked inside, and this time was no different. Grandpa's funeral took place on a drizzly day, the Charleston sky low and heavy, as if pressing down on everything. The small church by the river was packed. Relatives, old friends of his, and veterans who'd served with him in the war. They spoke of him with reverence. A stern but fair man, one who never bowed to hardship. I stood in a corner of the church wearing my only black suit, listening to stories about him I knew by heart. Jackson, now 19, stood beside our parents, sobbing like a child, drawing every eye. "Poor kid," I heard an aunt whisper to Mom. "He loved his grandpa so much." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. No one asked how much I loved him. No one knew about the nights I sat by his hospital bed, holding his frail hand as he coughed and told me one last time about the ships he'd steered through raging seas. The funeral unfolded under that gray, oppressive sky, the drizzle pattering like a mournful drum. The church was filled with people, family, Grandpa's old comrades and neighbors, standing in rows, their voices low as they recounted Henry's life, a man of discipline and integrity, unyielding in the face of storms. I stood quietly in the corner, my old suit feeling like a weight, as if I were breaking apart piece by piece. Their stories, so familiar, tore at my heart but did nothing to fill the screaming void inside me. Jackson, by our parents' side, wept loudly, his shoulders shaking like a child's. All eyes turned to him, murmurs of sympathy rippling through the crowd. "Poor thing," Aunt Sarah said to Mom, her voice dripping with pity. "He loved Henry so much." My fists tightened, nails biting into my palms, the pain sharp but nothing compared to the wound in my chest. No one looked at me. No one asked how much I loved him. No one knew I'd spent those final nights by his bedside, holding his bony hand, listening to his labored breaths as he spoke of ships braving stormy oceans. "Son," he'd whispered, his voice weak but still sharp as a blade, "keep your back straight no matter what happens." I nodded, tears falling silently, but I didn't let him see. I wanted him to leave this world seeing the strong August he always believed in. In the church, amid the patter of rain and the smell of damp wood, I felt like I was losing not just Grandpa, but the light that had guided me through years of being overlooked by my family. He was the only one who truly saw me, not as the big brother who had to sacrifice. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone how much I loved him, how he'd taught me to stand tall and believe in myself. But I stayed silent as always, letting the pain burn quietly in my chest. When everyone left, I lingered by his coffin, placing a hand on the cold wood and whispering, "I won't let you down." The rain kept falling, but I felt him somewhere, watching me with that subtle smile and piercing blue eyes, as if saying, "Good job, son." After the funeral, the family was summoned to the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I didn't expect much. Grandpa wasn't rich in the conventional sense. He lived simply with his wooden house, an old pickup truck, and a few small plots of land around Charleston. I thought he'd leave the house to Dad, his only son, and maybe split some savings between Jackson and me. I didn't need money. I just wanted something of his. A worn book, the pipe he smoked, anything to keep him close. My parents sat upright in leather chairs, exuding confidence. Dad, with his scruffy beard and hands still stained with machine oil, was certain everything would go to him. Mom, in a gray sweater, held Jackson's hand as he fiddled with his phone, looking bored. I sat at the end of the table, quiet as usual, watching the lawyer, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, open a brown folder. Henry Harlan's will was drafted 2 years ago, he began, his voice flat like a newsreader. I'll read the main distribution of assets. I don't recall the exact words, but I'll never forget the feeling, like my heart stopped, when the lawyer read aloud. The commercial building at 127 King Street, downtown Charleston, along with full ownership rights, is bequeathed to my grandson, August Harlan. The room fell so silent I could hear the wall clock ticking. That building, a 3-story red brick structure in Charleston's bustling heart, was Grandpa's most valuable asset. I knew it because he'd taken me there as a kid, pointing at the large glass windows and saying, "One day, August, you'll understand the value of building something lasting." I never imagined he'd leave it to me. The lawyer continued, "The wooden house by the Cooper River goes to my son, William Harlan, and his wife, Elizabeth Harlan. The 1985 Ford pickup goes to my grandson, Jackson Harlan." He paused, scanning the room as if gauging reactions. Dad's brow furrowed. Mom gripped Jackson's hand tighter, and Jackson snapped his head up from his phone, mouth agape. "What?" he blurted, his voice shrill. "An old truck? And August gets the whole building?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses and read a brief passage from the will, his tone growing formal. "This property is for August, the only one I trust to have the strength and character to preserve and grow it. Don't let anyone tell you you're not worthy." Those words, written in black ink, rang in my ears in Grandpa's voice, warm and steady like the Cooper's tides. I sat there, heart pounding, overwhelmed with both emotion and disbelief. Grandpa had seen me even when I felt invisible. He chose me not because I was the big brother who could manage, but because he believed I was worthy. The moment was quickly shattered. Mom shot up, her voice trembling with anger. "This can't be what he meant. Why would August get that building? He manipulated Dad, didn't he?" Dad turned to me, eyes blazing. "What did you say to Grandpa, August? What did you do to make him write this will?" Jackson, his face twisted, chimed in. "He didn't do anything. He's just some gym bro, and I need money for my startup." Grandpa was tricked. I sat there, silent, absorbing their accusations. But this time I didn't feel hurt. A small fire sparked in my chest. Grandpa's fire. The lawyer, unruffled, confirmed the will was fully legal, drafted when Grandpa was of sound mind with 2 witnesses. But my parents and Jackson wouldn't let it go. They turned on me right there in the room. "August, you have to share this," Mom said, her voice sweet but sharp as a blade. "Family means we all benefit. You've got your career. Jackson has nothing yet." Jackson nodded, eyes teary, playing the victim as always. "Bro, I just want a chance. You don't need that building, right? Sell it, split it with the family." Dad capped it with a near threat. "If you keep it all, don't blame us for cutting you off." I looked at them, my family, seeing only the building, the money, what they wanted for Jackson. I stood, nodded politely to the lawyer, and said, "I'll think about it." But in my heart, I knew the real challenge was just beginning. They wouldn't leave me alone. Not ever. As I left the office, stepping onto Charleston's rain-slicked streets, I heard Grandpa's voice in my head. "Don't let anyone tell you you're not worthy." I clenched my fists, feeling him beside me, and I knew I had to protect this legacy. Not just the building, but his belief in me. The rain pattered on the cobblestone sidewalk, each drop tapping at my mind. reminding me that the real challenge wasn't out there but waiting for me in the house I once called family. I drove back to my small apartment, the dim streetlights reflecting off the windshield, and in my head my parents' and Jackson's words played on repeat like a stuck record. Family means we all benefit, Mom had said. Sell it, split it evenly, Dad ordered. And Jackson with his crocodile tears, August, I just want a chance. I knew they wouldn't stop there. They never stopped when it came to getting something for Jackson. In the days that followed, the pressure began like a wave. Small at first, then growing stronger, fiercer. Mom called every evening, her voice sweet as syrup but sharp as a blade. August, have you thought it over? That building's too much for you. Sell it, we'll split it, and the family will be happy. You don't want to tear us apart, do you? I sat on my old sofa in the apartment, staring out the window where the Charleston Sea glimmered in the distance, and answered curtly, I'm thinking about it, Mom. But I wasn't thinking about it at all. I was just trying to stay calm. Dad was more direct. He showed up at my gym one afternoon while I was coaching a client through squats. He stood in the corner, arms crossed, his gaze heavy as if it could crush me. August, he said as I wiped sweat and approached, don't be selfish. Jackson needs money. He has big dreams, unlike you. You've already got a stable job. Sell the building, give your brother a chance. I looked at Dad, the man with calloused hands from the shipyard, and realized he didn't see me. Not the nights I stayed up to pay tuition, not the times I gritted my teeth so Jackson could have everything. Dad, I replied evenly, it's Grandpa's will. I'm honoring his wishes. He shook his head, muttering something about an ungrateful son before storming off, leaving me with the clang of iron weights and the pounding of my heart. Jackson surprised me the most. I thought he'd stick to his victim act, but no, he switched tactics. One rainy evening he showed up at my apartment, hair soaked, his face contorted as if on the verge of tears. August, he said, voice trembling, I've got nothing. My job's dead end. My boss is a jerk. My pay's barely enough to live. You've got that whole building. You don't need it, right? I just need one shot at a startup, a chance to prove myself. I let him in, brewed a cup of black coffee, and listened as he rambled about his plan to open a bar, to change the game in Charleston, claiming he deserved it more because he had dreams. I looked at Jackson, my little brother, with his golden hair and the smile that once melted the family, and I didn't feel anger. I just felt sad that he didn't understand that opportunities aren't handed out. They're earned. But they didn't stop at words. When calls and visits failed, they turned to dirtier tactics. Mom started telling relatives I was greedy, that I'd tricked Grandpa into giving me the building. August was always so quiet, but who knew he was so calculating? I overheard her say to Aunt Betty over the phone, her voice laced with bitterness. Dad was blunter, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd betrayed the family, keeping the building out of selfishness, not thinking of my brother. Jackson took to social media, posting cryptic statuses. When family turns their back on you over money, paired with photos of him sitting alone in a cafe, staring out at the rain with a mournful expression. Those posts drew dozens of comments from friends and distant relatives, all pitying poor Jackson and vilifying me, the greedy older brother who got a windfall. I read those words on my phone, each one like a knife, but not because I cared what they thought. It hurt because I realized my family was willing to paint me as the villain just to get what they wanted. They didn't see me. They saw the building, the money that could flow into Jackson's pockets, the chance to keep spoiling him. And then, as a final blow, Mom called me late one night, her voice cold as ice. If you don't share, don't blame us for cutting you off. You don't want to lose your family, do you, August? I lay in bed after that call, staring at the ceiling, the distant sound of ocean waves echoing. Her threat didn't scare me, but it hurt. A deep, aching pain, like losing something I'd never truly had. I thought of Grandpa, his piercing blue eyes, his words. You don't need a silver tongue, August. You need a straight back, working hands, and a mind that keeps its word. I knew I couldn't give in, not because I wanted the building for myself, but because I had to protect Grandpa's trust in me. The pressure escalated in the days that followed. My parents brought in a family lawyer trying to find loopholes in the will, though the original lawyer had confirmed its legality. Jackson sent relentless texts alternating between pleading and accusing. "Don't you care about family at all?" Followed by, "You're just a gym bro. What do you know about managing property?" I didn't respond, didn't argue. I'd learned from Grandpa that silence could be the strongest weapon. But inside, I was planning. I knew my family wouldn't stop, that they'd keep pressing until I broke or gave in. Each night, I sat by my window looking out at the Charleston Sea where moonlight shattered on the water. I thought of Grandpa, the building, and what I had to do to keep my promise to him. And then, in a quiet moment, an idea struck. A move that no one in my family, not even Jackson, could have anticipated. It would not only protect Grandpa's legacy, but also teach them a lesson. That worth isn't proven with words, but with actions. I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and found the number of someone who would change everything. The idea came to me like a flash of light in the darkness, sharp and clear, the way my grandfather used to look at me when he taught me to stand tall in the face of hardship. I needed a solution that would both protect his legacy and show them I was no longer the invisible boy I once was. And then I thought of Mr. Charles Whitaker, Jackson's direct boss, a wealthy entrepreneur, CEO of a rising real estate company in Charleston. Jackson had bragged about him incessantly, about how Mr. Whitaker valued him, about the lavish company parties he was invited to. That was Jackson's talisman, the thing that made our parents proud, the shield he used to cover up his failures. And that was the key to my strategy. I contacted Mr. Whitaker through a mutual acquaintance, an old gym client of mine who had worked with him. "Charles is looking for a building in downtown Charleston for a new office," my friend said, and I knew immediately the opportunity had arrived. I arranged a meeting, not at a lawyer's office or a fancy cafe, but at the very building at 127 King Street. Mr. Whitaker arrived on an autumn morning, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, exuding the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders. He shook my hand firmly and surveyed the building with the sharp eye of an investor. "Young Harlan," he said, his voice low but friendly, "this building is a gem. Prime location, solid structure. Why do you want to sell it?" I smiled, not rushing to answer. I led him through each floor, pointing out the small details, the original brick walls, the high ceilings with exposed beams, and told him about my grandfather, about how he built everything with his own hands. But I didn't mention family, didn't mention the pressure. I only said, I want this building to belong to someone who appreciates its value the way my grandfather did. After an hour-long tour, Mr. Whitaker named a figure, higher than market value, higher than I had ever imagined. "I want this building for the company's new office," he said, his eyes gleaming. "This will be our headquarters where my team, including Jackson, will work." I nodded, maintaining a calm expression, but inside I felt a surge of electricity. Jackson, who had begged and pleaded to divide the inheritance, would have to work every day in the very building he tried to take from me. It wasn't revenge, I didn't gloat, but it was justice, the kind my grandfather would have approved of with a smile. I didn't rush to sign the contract. I knew I needed terms to protect myself, to preserve a piece of my grandfather's legacy. I worked with a private lawyer, not the family lawyer whom my parents had tried to sway, to draft the agreement. I requested to lease back a small apartment on the top floor of the building where I could live and continue to look out over the Charleston Sea as a reminder of my journey. More importantly, I added a right of first refusal clause. If Mr. Whitaker or his company ever wanted to sell the building, I would have the first option to buy it back. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret, nodded approvingly. "You're smart, August. You're not just preserving part of the legacy, you're securing the future." I smiled, thinking of my grandfather, of the steadfast integrity he always spoke of. The deal was finalized in secret. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Jackson, not even my closest friends. I knew the family was still waiting for me to give in, still plotting to pressure me into selling and splitting the money. They didn't know I had outmaneuvered them, not with words but with actions. Every night I sat in the apartment looking out at the sea and reviewed the paperwork. The contract was signed, the money transferred to my account, but I didn't feel rich. I felt strong, as if I were standing on a ship in the middle of a storm, gripping the helm the way my grandfather once did. When everything was ready, I knew the moment of confrontation was approaching. My family had planned a meeting, believing I would bow my head and agree to sell the building. They had invited the family lawyer, even a real estate broker, as if everything was already decided. But they didn't know I had prepared one final move, a move that would force them to see me, truly see me, for the first time in my life. That morning, Charleston awoke in a gentle golden sunlight, but inside me a storm was quietly brewing. I stood before the mirror in my small apartment, adjusting my simple white dress shirt, not to impress, but to remind myself that I was August Harlan, grandson of Henry Harlan, a man who didn't need flashiness to prove his worth. I took a deep breath, feeling the salty sea air fill my lungs, and stepped out of the house. The meeting was held at my parents' house, the familiar wooden home where I grew up, where memories of favoritism still lingered like the smell of damp wood after rain. I arrived on time, a disciplined habit I learned from my grandfather. As I entered the living room, I saw they were ready. My father sat at the head of the table, his calloused hands clasped tightly, his eyes seeming to want to crush me. My mother sat beside him in a gray wool dress, her smile sweet but icy, and Jackson with his messy blonde hair pretending to be busy with his phone, though I knew he was watching me. Next to them was the family lawyer, Mr. Thompson, with his thick glasses and a stack of documents in front of him, and an unfamiliar real estate broker, a middle-aged woman with a smile so professional it felt artificial. The air in the room was heavy, as if everything had been orchestrated to corner me. "August," my mother began, her voice soft but calculated, "we're here to settle the matter of the building. Have you thought it through? The family needs to stay united, and the best way is to sell it and split the money evenly. Jackson needs funds for his new project, you know that." My father chimed in, his voice hard as steel. "Don't drag this out, August. You don't need that building. You have your job, but Jackson's struggling. As the older brother, you need to sacrifice." Jackson, as if rehearsed, looked up with teary eyes. "Brother, I just want a chance. Don't you see how hard it's been for me? Why do you need that building when you don't even use it?" I sat there on the old wooden chair listening as they took turns speaking. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, opened his documents, and talked about market prices, about how selling the building would benefit the whole family. The broker jumped in, her voice overly enthusiastic. "King Street is a gold mine. We could make a fortune." They kept talking like a well-rehearsed choir, each playing a role. My mother the persuader, my father the intimidator, Jackson the victim, and the supporting characters setting the stage for their performance. I stayed silent, letting them talk, letting them think they were backing me into a corner. When they paused, waiting for me to respond, I stood up slowly, letting my gaze sweep over each of them. "If you want to settle this once and for all," I said, my voice steady but strong enough to silence the room, "then come to the building. I have something to announce." "There." My mother frowned. My father muttered something about wasting time, and Jackson pursed his lips as if I were trying to prolong the game. But they agreed, perhaps because they believed I had given in, that I would sign the sale papers on the spot. We drove to 127 King Street, a strange procession winding through the heart of Charleston. When we arrived, I stepped out of my truck, feeling the cool morning air fill my chest. The building stood there, sturdy with its red brick walls and windows glinting in the sunlight. But something was different. A new polished sign had been mounted at the entrance, reading Whitaker Enterprises Headquarters. Furniture was being moved in, workers in uniforms carrying desks, computers, and cardboard boxes through the main door. A sleek black Mercedes was parked in front of the building. Its door opened, and out stepped Mr. Charles Whitaker, impeccably dressed in his gray suit, his confident smile that of a man who had just won a chess match. My parents and Jackson stood frozen as if turned to stone. "What is this?" my father roared, turning to me. My mother's face went pale. Jackson, ashen, stared at Mr. Whitaker, the man he had once bragged about as his amazing boss. I stepped forward, standing between them and Mr. Whitaker, and said, my voice calm but clear, "The deal is done. This building now belongs to Whitaker Enterprises. Mr. Whitaker bought it legally for above market value." Mr. Whitaker approached, shaking my hand in front of everyone before turning to my family. "Young August is an excellent negotiator," he said, his voice warm but authoritative. "This building will be our company's new office. Jackson, you'll be working here quite a bit. I hope you'll focus on work rather than distractions." His words were gentle, but they cut like a knife, sharp and precise, making Jackson lower his head, unable to look up. I saw him clench his fists, his lips pressed tight as if something more valuable than the building had been stripped away. His pride, which he had never truly possessed. My mother exploded first. "August, you've betrayed the family," she screamed, her voice breaking with anger. "You sold the building behind our backs. You exploited your grandfather." My father stepped forward, his face red, pointing at me. "You think this is over? We'll sue. You had no right." I stood there, back straight, looking them in the eyes. "I didn't betray anyone," I said, my voice cold but firm. "I only protected what grandfather trusted me to keep. If you want to call that betrayal, that's your choice." Mr. Thompson, the family lawyer, fumbled through his papers, then confirmed in an awkward tone, "The deal is legal. The contract is signed, all paperwork completed." The real estate broker stood nearby, mouth agape, clearly unprepared for the collapse of their carefully staged drama. I looked at my family, my father with his clenched fists, my mother with tear-filled eyes, Jackson with his humiliated expression. And I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt relief, as if I had just weathered a storm my grandfather once spoke of, standing tall with my head held high. As the group dispersed, King Street returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of traffic and the laughter of tourists filling the air as if the confrontation had never happened. I lingered in front of the building, sunlight streaming through the large glass windows reflecting the image of a 28-year-old man, no longer the invisible boy of the past. The Whitaker Enterprises sign gleamed under the sun, a declaration that I had kept my promise to my grandfather. I took a deep breath, letting the salty Charleston sea air fill my chest, and walked into the small attic apartment, the space I had secured in the contract to preserve a piece of his legacy. The room was modest, with a simple bed, an old wooden table, and a window overlooking the sea. But to me, it was a fortress, a place where I could stand firm amidst the storms of family. The fallout from my move spread like wildfire on dry grass. Jackson felt it first and perhaps most deeply. News of the deal circulated through Mr. Whitaker's company faster than I had expected. Just a few days later, I heard from a gym client whose brother worked at the same company as Jackson that the office was abuzz with gossip. "Did you hear? The new building the company just bought was the inheritance Jackson bragged about getting," a colleague whispered during a lunch break. "Turns out his brother sold it to the boss." The stories spread from meeting rooms to coffee machines, and Jackson, who once loved being the center of attention, now became the subject of sidelong glances and discreet mockery. His reputation, already fragile due to failed projects and a lazy attitude, crumbled like a sandcastle before the tide. Mr. Whitaker, true to his sharp CEO demeanor, didn't let Jackson off easily. I heard that he began monitoring Jackson's performance more closely, demanding detailed reports and assigning him to projects that required discipline, something Jackson always lacked. Once, during an all-staff meeting, Mr. Whitaker stood before the team, gestured toward the building, and said, "This is where we build our future. I expect everyone, including you, Jackson, to work with the dedication this place deserves." Jackson, seated in the back row, kept his head down, no longer sporting the confident smile or boasting about his close relationship with the boss. I wasn't there, but I could imagine his face, pale, lips pressed tight, like a child stripped of a favorite toy. My parents didn't escape the consequences either. In their small neighborhood, news of my grandfather's will and my deal spread quickly. Neighbors who had once heard my parents boast about Jackson now whispered a different story. "I heard Mr. Henry left the big building to August, not Jackson," an older woman said at the grocery store. "Who would have thought the eldest was the one the old man trusted most?" Another added, "They always bragged about the youngest. Turns out the old man knew better." Those remarks, though not always intentional, pierced my parents' pride like daggers. A few days later, my mother called, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and shame. "August, do you know what the neighborhood is saying? They think your father and I played favorites, that we were unfair to you. Are you satisfied now?" I sat in my attic apartment, gazing at the shimmering sea, and replied calmly, "Mom, I didn't do anything to make them say that. They're just saying what they see." She went silent for a moment, then hung up without an apology or a single question about how I was doing. My father didn't call, but I heard from an aunt that he smashed a mug in the kitchen when a neighbor mentioned my name. I, on the other hand, carried on as I always had. I moved into the attic apartment where I could hear the waves crashing each night and feel my grandfather's presence by my side. I still went to the gym every morning, coaching my clients with unwavering dedication, helping them lift weights and build their confidence. I didn't boast about the deal or share what had happened with anyone. My clients, who had seen me work myself to exhaustion, only remarked, "August, you seem lighter lately. Something good happen?" I just smiled and said, "I just weathered a storm." But my family didn't let me rest for long. Jackson began sending long, rambling messages alternating between apologies and accusations. "Brother, I didn't expect you to do this." One message read, "You knew I needed that building. Now the whole company sees me as a failure." I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because I knew words wouldn't change anything. My parents continued to apply pressure through short, curt phone calls, filled with vague threats about how they wouldn't forgive me or how I'd regret this. But I wasn't fazed. I had learned from my grandfather that honor lies not in what others think, but in living true to yourself. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on my own life. I went to the gym, coaching my clients with a genuine smile, helping them push past their limits. But Jackson, my younger brother, who had once been the center of attention, began to spiral. A slow but inevitable decline, like an old ship battered against rocky shores by the waves. I didn't actively keep tabs on him. Fragments of news reached me through whispers from relatives, messages from mutual friends, and occasionally through the social media posts where he still tried to maintain his free-spirited artist persona. Jackson's work life crumbled first. No longer propped up by our parents, who were now grappling with their own humiliation, he revealed the weaknesses that had always been masked by boasts and their indulgence. Mr. Whitaker, with his ironclad management style, stopped tolerating minor mistakes. I heard that Jackson was assigned simple tasks like updating real estate databases, but he consistently missed deadlines, submitted sloppy reports, and even made basic errors like sending the wrong files to clients. "Jackson, you need to focus," Mr. Whitaker said during a meeting, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "This building is a symbol of professionalism. Don't let me down." Those reminders escalated into private meetings, then formal warnings. Colleagues began avoiding him, not out of malice, but because they didn't want to be dragged down by his failures. I remember one afternoon, as I was brewing coffee in my attic apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Betty, the relative closest to our family. "August, Jackson's been put on performance review. His boss says if he doesn't improve, he'll be fired." I read the message, feeling a pang of sadness. Not pity, but regret for a younger brother who had every opportunity but never knew how to seize them. Jackson wasn't a bad person. He was just a product of being spoiled, a boy raised to believe the world would revolve around him without effort. Now, with the world turning its back, he didn't know how to stand up. Jackson's lifestyle deteriorated as well. Before, he spent lavishly, nights at upscale bars, designer clothes, short trips he flaunted on Instagram with captions like, "Live to the fullest." But now, without our parents' endless financial support, Jackson began to drown in debt. I heard from a mutual friend that he was borrowing money to pay credit card bills, promising to pay it back once my startup takes off. But those startups, an idea for a local dating app, a plan for online sales, failed spectacularly. Friends began to distance themselves not out of cruelty but because they were tired of his empty promises. His social media posts dwindled, replaced by vague stories about tough days, or photos of a lone beer with captions like, "Sometimes things don't go as planned." Within the family, things grew even worse. Our parents still defended Jackson as if it were an unbreakable habit, but their patience was wearing thin. I got a call from Mom late one night, her voice more exhausted than ever. "August, Jackson's in trouble again. He borrowed money from us to pay debts, but now he refuses to get a second job. We don't have the resources anymore." Dad in the background cut in with an irritated tone. "The boy needs help, but you've made everything a mess." I didn't argue, only said, "Mom, Dad, Jackson needs to learn to stand on his own. I can't help if he doesn't want to." They hung up, but I knew their words were just a facade. Then one evening, as I sat reading by the window of my apartment, gazing at the Charleston Sea shimmering under the moonlight, there was an urgent knock at the door. I opened it, and there stood Jackson, his hair a mess, eyes red from lack of sleep or perhaps tears, clothes wrinkled as if he hadn't changed since morning. "Brother," he said, his voice hoarse, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I can't take it anymore. You stole my future. That building, if you'd shared it with me, I could have started my business, proved myself to everyone. Now what? The whole company laughs at me. Mom and Dad are fighting because of me. My friends avoid me. Are you happy now?" I let him sit on the old sofa, pouring him a glass of warm water, thinking he needed to calm down more than he needed to be alert. Jackson sat there, hands trembling as he held the glass, and continued to blame me. "You're always so quiet, always acting like the hero. But you're selfish, only thinking about yourself. Grandpa was wrong. You don't deserve it." His words stung not because they were true, but because they came from the younger brother I had once shielded from Dad's anger. I sat across from him, looking straight into his eyes, and said, my voice calm but firm, "I didn't steal anything, Jackson. I only held on to what Grandpa trusted me to keep. He saw me, saw my hard work, my honesty, and chose me for it. Your future, and you lost it long ago. Not because of the building, not because of me, but because you never really tried. You had every opportunity, but you used them to brag, to expect others to clean up after you. Now's the time to stand up, little brother, not by blaming others, but by working." Jackson stared at me, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation, then stood, slammed the glass on the table, and stormed to the door. "You'll regret this," he shouted before the door slammed shut. I sat there, alone in the quiet apartment, listening to the distant crash of waves. I wasn't angry at Jackson. I was only sad for him, for what he could have become if he didn't change. But I knew, as Grandpa had taught me, that everyone must carve their own path. And Jackson, painful as it was learning that lesson in the harshest way. In the weeks that followed, his decline continued. I heard that Jackson was fired from Whitaker Enterprises, not abruptly, but after a final failed project where he missed a deadline and blamed his colleagues. Our parents tried to find him new jobs, but Jackson refused, saying he needed time to think. Instead, he sank deeper. Late nights at bars, mounting debts, and arguments with our parents that echoed through the phone when they called me for advice, though they never truly listened. I didn't intervene. I just kept living, with the gym, the Charleston Sea, and the belief that time would heal the wounds one way or another. The mornings in Charleston still began like a wordless poem. I woke before dawn, jogging along the beach as the sun rose, painting the horizon in vibrant orange. The waves crashed against the shore, steady and patient like the way my grandfather taught me to live. Unhurried, unboisterous, but always moving forward. My attic apartment, with its window overlooking the sea, had become a sanctuary, a place where I could sit alone, listen to the salt-laden breeze, and remember my grandfather, the man who gave me not just a building but a compass to navigate life's storms. Each evening, as the moonlight shattered across the water, I sat by the window holding the old notebook my grandfather left behind, a journal he wrote during his years at sea. The pages had yellowed, the ink smudged in places, but his words remained vivid, as if he were sitting beside me, puffing on his pipe and telling stories. "Don't let anyone tell you you're unworthy, August," he wrote on the final page, his handwriting shaky but resolute. I reread that line each time, feeling my heart tighten, not from pain but from knowing he saw through me, saw a man I hadn't yet seen in myself. My family, like waves receding from the shore, gradually faded from my life. My parents no longer called regularly. Their calls dwindled from angry accusations to short, cold questions, as if they didn't know what to say to me anymore. I heard from Aunt Betty that they still defended Jackson, still tried to find him new jobs, but their patience was wearing thin. Jackson, after being fired from Whitaker Enterprises, spiraled further. He left Charleston, moving to a small town near Atlanta, claiming he wanted to start over. But the scattered news that reached me, through mutual friends, through fleeting social media posts, showed he was still chasing pipe dreams, still spending beyond his means, still waiting for a big break to fall from the sky. I wasn't angry at him anymore. I only hoped that one day he'd find what I had found, the strength to stand on his own. My parents, in their bitterness, all but cut contact with me. Once my mother sent a long message saying I had torn the family apart, that I had chosen money over kinship. I read it in my quiet apartment and for the first time felt no pain. I only felt regret that they never truly saw me. Regret that they didn't understand I hadn't kept the building for money, but to honor my promise to my grandfather. I didn't reply to the message. Instead, I stood up, brewed a cup of black coffee, and looked out at the sea where the moonlight still shimmered, reminding me that I had found my own peace. My work at the gym continued to flourish. My clients came to me not just to lift weights, but to find transformation in their bodies, their minds, their lives. I taught them how to keep their backs straight, how to breathe properly, but above all, how to believe in themselves. A single mother, after 3 months of training, hugged me in tears when she fit into an old dress she thought she'd never wear again. A 17-year-old boy, once bullied at school, stood in front of the gym mirror and smiled when he saw his muscles taking shape. Those moments, small but radiant, were my true legacy. The lives I touched, just as my grandfather had touched mine. I thought of him often, especially on quiet nights. I remembered his voice, warm and steady like the waves of the Cooper River, his sharp blue eyes that looked at me as if I were his whole world. He saw the future, I know that now. He knew Jackson, despite being spoiled, wouldn't have the strength to preserve what he built. He knew my parents, though loving, would be blinded by favoritism. And he knew that I, though quiet, though invisible, had something no one else in the family did. The resolve to stand firm. He didn't leave me the building to make me rich. He left it to test me, to see if I could keep my promise. And I did. Sitting in my attic apartment, my grandfather's notebook in hand, I realized his final message wasn't about property, but about character. Revenge, if it existed, wasn't in humiliating Jackson or shaming my parents. It was in living true to his teachings, back straight, hands working, head held high with integrity. I no longer needed their approval. I had Charleston, the sea, the clients who trusted me, and most importantly, I had myself, an August Harlan who had weathered the storm, not to destroy, but to build. As I closed the notebook, I looked out at the sea where the moonlight still fractured on the water. I smiled, not out of triumph, but out of peace. My grandfather's greatest legacy wasn't the building, but the belief that honesty and resilience would overcome any injustice. And I, with every step I ran on the beach, every weight I lifted, every smile from a client, was living that belief. 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 Belief.